Meanwhile, Nia scolded Lucien, saying that if he wanted to see Riella, he, like everyone else, should have informed her first. The girl finally regained her composure and asked who Lucien was. He introduced himself as the chairman of the 26th Round Table Conference. Riella remembered Duchess Hoson mentioning people from the Round Table and expressing dissatisfaction with their activities. The Round Table was the largest association of stonemancers in Cardia, providing donations and warriors to fight the dragons. Lucien, being from this community, apologized for his sudden proposal and explained there were reasons for it. He asked for permission to explain everything in a more comfortable setting, away from the street. Nia persuaded Riella to listen to him, so the three of them moved to a nearby café. Lucien invited them in and ordered drinks. The group enjoyed their coffee in silence at first. Riella observed Lucien with some concern, unsure of what to expect from him, but with Nia beside her, she felt somewhat reassured. Nia, on the other hand, was delighted by the free coffee, knowing her friend would not harm anyone. Eventually, Riella couldn't hold back and asked why a man she was meeting for the first time would suddenly propose to her. Lucien explained that the proposal was a decision made by the Round Table, and as chairman, he had no right to oppose it. He added that he had information about Duchess Hoson, which immediately piqued Riella's interest. Lucien continued, explaining that in the past, Duchess Hoson had supplied the Round Table with the necessary magical stones that allowed stonemancers to protect Cardia from dragons. However, a few months ago, the Round Table received a request for all the stones to be returned. The council complied, expecting them back after a standard check, but shortly after, news came of Duchess Hosang's death. The stones were never returned, causing chaos. The Round Table now desperately needed to replenish the lost crystals, but no one knew where to find them. The stonemancers were working tirelessly, even entering agreements in other countries, many of which were being terminated within Cardia. To resolve the situation, the Round Table decided they must retrieve Duchess Hosang's stones. One of the stonemancers, an older man, proposed marriage to Riella, but Lucien, not wanting to burden the girl with such a proposal, took it upon himself to represent the Round Table's interests. Riella was puzzled, asking why they couldn't simply contact her and borrow the stones. Lucien explained that marriage was the simplest way to transfer rights to precious stones among stonemancers. He added that such marriage proposals were common and seen as a formal greeting within the community, which they took in stride. Despite Lucien's explanation, Riella couldn't calm her unease about the situation. She told him directly that she would not accept the proposal. Lucien, regretfully, warned that if she rejected him, someone else would surely come forward, and it would be better for her to choose him over the others, who might be even more eager for the Duchess's stones, which now belonged to Riella. Although Riella was frightened by the thought of such suitors, she remained firm in her decision to not marry for such a reason. She wasn't a stonemancer after all. Lucien understood and tried to help, suggesting that if he were to show his feelings towards her, there might be fewer suitors. With that, he raised his voice and loudly proclaimed that Riella was refusing him. Passers-by immediately took notice. Lucien, eager for attention, continued his speech, hoping to draw more eyes to the situation. Riella listened in disbelief, praying that he wouldn't escalate things further. Just then, a figure appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, clearly angry. It was the Archduke, who immediately recognized Lucien and demanded an explanation for his public proposal to Riella. The crowd, sensing the potential for a major altercation, quickly turned their attention elsewhere, pretending they hadn't witnessed anything. Meanwhile, the Archduke, with a hint of sarcasm, suggested that rather than marrying Lucien, it would be better for Riella to marry him. Before the conversation could escalate further, Nia interrupted, intentionally coughing loudly to end the pointless argument about the mistress's marriage. In an attempt to avoid further tension, Nia dramatically fell to the floor and pretended to be ill. It wasn't until they returned to the estate that Nia claimed to feel better, though Riella remained deeply concerned. Meanwhile, the Archduke sat alone in his room at Riella's mansion, reflecting on the events that transpired at the café. He was mortified that he had actually fought for Riella's attention, even going so far as to propose marriage. Though he tried to console himself with the excuse that Lucien's persistence left him with no choice, it didn't make him feel any better. He still couldn't figure out what answer he was hoping for from Riella, and was uneasy about the possibility of a rejection. Suddenly, the Archduke noticed someone standing behind the door. Thanks to his skills as a stonemancer, he detected the intruder's presence before they revealed themselves. Concerned, he grabbed a weapon, preparing for any potential threat, and approached the door cautiously. Before he could make any defensive moves, the door opened, and Riella cautiously stepped in, apologizing for the late visit. She hoped she hadn't disturbed him. The Archduke assured her that he hadn't been asleep, and asked what had brought her to his room. Riella hesitated, clearly uncertain about how to express herself. She took a deep breath, clenched her fists in determination, and finally spoke. With great effort, she mustered the courage to ask if he would accompany her to the flower market the next day. The Archduke was confused by her request, unsure why she would need his company, as she could easily go to the market on her own. Riella explained that her lawyers had forbidden her to leave the mansion unaccompanied. Nia, initially agreeing to go with her, had fallen seriously ill, forcing Riella to seek someone else's assistance. Riella had been worried about Nia's condition, but Nia refused to see a doctor, claiming she would go in the morning. Seeing no other choice, Riella explained her situation and pleaded with the Archduke to go with her. Her pleading expression was enough to sway him, and he reluctantly agreed to accompany her the next day. The following day, they found themselves in the same carriage, heading to the city. At first, neither of them spoke, both unsure how to begin the conversation. Eventually, the Archduke broke the silence, asking if everything was all right with Riella, as she seemed unusually quiet. She explained that she was simply worried about Nia, who was still in her room. Despite the doctor's visit, Riella couldn't help but feel torn between her concern for her assistant and the pressure of potentially being disqualified from the festival. The Archduke, unfamiliar with the details of Riella's qualifications for the festival, asked her to explain. She shared that her status as a store owner required her to maintain a certain standing, and this was the first time she had been lucky enough to draw a spot. If she missed the opportunity, it might be her last chance. Riella promised that upon their return, she would find another strong stonemancer to replace Nia. At the mention of Lucien's possible involvement, the Archduke's lip twitched with visible displeasure. He quickly interrupted her, insisting there was no need to find anyone else to take his place, as he would continue to accompany her wherever she needed to go. Upon arrival at the flower festival, Riella's excitement was palpable. She hadn't been to such an event in a long time, and the vibrant array of plants and bustling crowd lifted her spirits. As she pulled the Archduke along, her hand firmly gripping his sleeve, the Archduke found himself unexpectedly blushing. It was strange to him that Riella was so comfortable pulling him around like this. The Archduke asked if the market was always this busy, and Riella explained that it was a special day, the one when all the rare flowers were brought in, which caused the usual long lines. Eager to see the auction, she grabbed his hand once again and led him through the crowd. After struggling through the throng of people, they finally reached the flower auction. Riella, still catching her breath, asked if the Archduke was okay, to which he admitted it was probably harder on her than on him. Riella, however, assured him that she was fine and already had a list of flowers to buy. She began by looking for roses and carnations, then searched for gloriosus frus and lanthus. As Riella focused on finding the best flowers, the Archduke couldn't help but admire her dedication and attention to detail. Unexpectedly, he realized that Riella had been holding his hand for a while. The thought of holding her hand, initiating the gesture himself, crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. He was unsure how she would react. As they made their purchases, Riella seemed pleased with the flowers she had selected. When the Archduke asked if they could go home, Riella agreed, although had she been on her own before receiving her inheritance, she would have continued to wander the market. At that moment, the Archduke noticed a group of people in red hats surrounded by a crowd, selling something. Curious, he asked Riella about them, and she explained that they were auctioning rare flowers. She was particularly interested in a flower called the elf, a rare and bright red variety that hadn't been seen for a long time. The crowd, eager to see it, rushed towards the auction. The Archduke, puzzled by the excitement, asked if the flower was really that special. Riella's eyes sparkled with excitement as she explained that the elf flower had been scarce, and its rarity made it highly coveted. The Archduke then asked if she intended to go see it, but Riella declined, not wanting to keep him waiting. With a soft smile, the Archduke turned and joined the crowd, drawn by the curiosity of the rare flower. Meanwhile, the woman in the headdress announced that they had 3 blossoming flowers and 2 buds up for bidding, starting the price at 5,000. She smiled sarcastically as she set the starting price, which was ridiculously high for an ordinary flower. Riella was shocked by such a price, as she never imagined that even rare plants could be so expensive. The people around them whispered in surprise, remembering that the starting price last time was only 300, not 5,000, which made things much more difficult for potential buyers. Though most of the people had come just to observe, there were also real buyers, and one of them immediately quoted 10,000 for the flowers. This caused a stir among the onlookers, who turned to see the first buyer. The red-haired, smug-looking man named Hayden appeared before them. He was the owner of the largest flower shop in the capital. Riella immediately recognized him, as she had often seen him purchasing flowers for large sums at auctions, even studying his flower arrangements. Hay had never seen him before, so he turned to the drooping Riella and asked her to tell him about Hayden so he could form his own opinion. The girl explained that Hayden had an apparent obsession with red flowers, as he seemed to buy everything of that variety. He was known for taking home flowers that others would never see again, making his reputation quite unpopular. Last year, he had also purchased the rare elves, but these flowers were usually bought for exhibition halls and were never shown to the public. Riella, knowing that these elves could be the last of their kind, tried to calculate how much money she had left, but then she heard the price for the 5 flowers was, once again, set at 10,000 of their local currency, which could easily be equivalent to 500,000 in other countries. This made it even harder to bid. At that moment, a girl in the crowd named Milonia suddenly offered 10,000, 500 roos, forcing the saleswoman to return the flowers to their place. The crowd immediately recognized Milonia as someone who hadn't been seen in a long time, which sparked curiosity and surprise. Milonia lashed out at one man who had criticized her flower-growing style, arguing that it was unique to her. He retorted that it still looked creepy. Then Milonia's eyes locked with Hayden's, and the tension was palpable as a serious bidding war was about to begin. Indeed, the two began to raise the price higher and higher. In the end, Milonia could no longer stand it and demanded that Hayden give up, arguing that his business was slowly dying out and he needed money. Hayden, however, wasn't about to back down. He countered that it was Milonia who should stop, since even her followers had already turned their backs on her. Unable to reach a compromise, the two continued to escalate the price while the onlookers watched in silence. Riella, feeling exhausted by the situation, tugged on the Archduke's sleeve, drawing attention to herself. When he turned around, she suggested that they had seen enough and should return to the carriage and head back to the mansion. H was surprised that Riella wasn't interested in purchasing the flowers or staying to watch the verbal battle between Hayden and Milonia. In truth, the girl wanted the flowers, but she didn't have enough money. Rather than continue torturing herself, she wanted to leave. Just then, the woman in the red headdress called out that the final price was 20,000, and if no one else bid, the flowers would be sold. But, unexpectedly, Han, standing behind the crowd, loudly declared that he was offering 100,000 for the flowers. The crowd gasped in shock. Riella was so stunned by what she had heard that she couldn't speak. She simply stood there, watching the Archduke and the rare elf seller in disbelief. She had never imagined that such a large sum would be bid, and she asked, almost in disbelief, if she had truly heard him correctly. Han repeated his bid with an air of arrogance and irritation, brazenly challenging anyone who could raise it. Riella was even more horrified by this display. Milonia, who had never seen Han before, was shocked that someone would offer such an amount for flowers. Hayden, in addition to his surprise, felt the sting of defeat, as he knew he could outbid Milonia. But he was no match for this unknown buyer. Meanwhile, the Archduke stood as calmly as possible in the middle of the street, waiting for the flowers to be wrapped. Gradually, people began to recognize him, and when it became clear that it was Hound who had bought the flowers, astonished exclamations rippled through the crowd. The noise was something the Archduke did not appreciate. Riella grabbed the Archduke's shoulder and, filled with excitement, demanded to speak with him to learn more about the flowers. The Archduke leaned in and, puzzled, asked if she wanted the flowers so badly. If so, what was the problem now? Riella explained that the flowers were beautiful, but 100,000 was too much to pay for them. She believed such large sums shouldn't be spent recklessly. Hound sighed calmly, thinking the lady might be after something more serious, then said he understood the value of money. He looked Riella in the eye and remarked that, for someone like her, you had to pay a price that matched her worth. When Riella grumbled in dissatisfaction, the Archduke reminded her that she was the Duchess of Hosang, a position that had already changed things for her. He added that as the only Archduke in the kingdom, he shouldn't lower himself. While they were bickering, the bright red elves were sold to Hound for 100,000, as no one else had bid higher. The crowd was thrilled to witness such an expensive transaction, while both Hayden and Milonia were disappointed they had missed out on the plants. Anne immediately turned and demanded the flowers from the saleswoman. Although the rules stated they should only be handed over after payment, the woman made an exception. When the flowers were presented to the Archduke, he turned to Riella and handed them to her, saying that he had bought them for her. Riella blushed, incredibly grateful for the gift, though embarrassed by its price. Looking at her with the bright red flowers, Han became slightly embarrassed and remarked that the elves suited her well. Later, as they were returning to the mansion together, Riella sat in the carriage, shaking. She had accepted the flowers, and now the deal for the lot couldn't be cancelled. Then, she remembered something important and called out to the Archduke, saying she had almost forgotten it. He asked curiously what she meant, and Riella, beaming, said she was talking about breakfast. A little later, Riella brought the Archduke to her close friend, Rena, who was overjoyed to see both of them. Rena immediately sized up the unfamiliar man from head to toe before asking Riella who he was. Riella decided to be honest and confessed that she had brought the Archduke himself to eat with her. Unexpectedly, Riella began to fuss as though deciding what to do. Then she elegantly curtsied and introduced herself to Han, welcoming him to her establishment. The Archduke accepted the bow calmly, but Riella could barely hold back her laughter, knowing full well that Riella had been rehearsing this moment for a long time. Afterward, Rena went to cook, and Riella realized that her friend would likely be proud of herself for quite some time. A few minutes later, Rena served her restaurant's signature dish, which shimmered beautifully on the plate. Riella was delighted and assured Han that her friend's food was truly delicious. As the girl chatted on, the Archduke interrupted, shrewdly asking if Riella was planning to pay for the flowers with her breakfast. The lady immediately fell silent, embarrassed, because she was unhappy that he had figured it out, though she didn't admit anything. Secretly, Riella hoped the Archduke would like Riella's food. Han, however, was lost in thought. On the battlefield, he often had to quickly eat simple soup and crackers, rarely giving much thought to the taste of food. He hadn't savoured a meal in a long time, and watching Riella enjoy her meal, he was struck by the thought that all the struggles of his life had been worth it to see this peaceful moment. The only thing he couldn't accept was how Riella worried about money. He knew that such an amount was nothing to her. Watching her eat, he couldn't help but calculate that even if he took 1,000,000 rubles from Hosang's inheritance, no one would notice. With a smile, he wondered what Riella's reaction would be if he suddenly gave her flowers worth 1,000,000 rubles. Suddenly, Han was surprised by his own thoughts. He couldn't understand why he was even considering giving something to the girl. He concluded that he had become too relaxed due to the contrast between his peaceful life in the battlefield and his observations of Riella. Forcing himself to focus, he told himself that this food was no different from the soup on the battlefield, and he shouldn't let his emotions interfere. Meanwhile, as Han and Riella were having breakfast at Rena's, Nia's condition was worsening. The girl was gradually losing her human form, and her assistant couldn't understand why, since the power of the stone shouldn't have dried up. She had secretly eaten one of her mistress's shining flowers, but it hadn't helped. Nia experienced enormous pain, and, when she looked into the mirror, was afraid of her own reflection. Her assistant suggested it might be the work of Hound, but quickly realized that if he had been behind it, he would have eliminated her differently. Nia was terrified of the moment when the Heliodor stone would stop functioning properly and her dragon instincts began to manifest. She had promised Duchess Hosang that she wouldn't waste this new life, which made her even more anxious. The assistant was determined to fulfill Hosang's last request, to protect Riella at all costs. However, Nia questioned whether she had been too greedy, wondering if she should have found another protector for Riella and returned to where Hosang had found her. Despite her worries, Nia cherished the time spent with Riella, because it was the only time she could laugh so freely. But now, the moment of danger had come, when she heard that Han had brought the lady to the palace, which was a very inconvenient timing for Nia. Meanwhile, the Archduke and Madame were lightly discussing the cost and variety of flowers as they approached the mansion. Nia, filled with fear, thought it was too late for her to run, as she wouldn't be able to slip out of the room unnoticed. The assistant was terrified that Riella might be frightened by her appearance, just like the person Nia had once encountered. She desperately didn't want her mistress to call her a monster or, even worse, accidentally harm Riella. Falling to her knees, Nia covered her ears with her hands, struggling to hold back her sobs. She was consumed by fear, not knowing who or what to pray to, but silently hoping that everything would stop and that she would return to normal. Suddenly, a voice in panic cut through her thoughts. The girl jumped up, searching the room, but found no one. However, the voice persisted, and, though she didn't truly believe it would help, Nia demanded that the unfamiliar voice return her to her original appearance. To her amazement, she felt herself completely revert to normal. Her human form had fully returned. Looking around the room in confusion, Nia couldn't spot anything unusual, and even her headache had vanished. As she tried to process what had just happened, she realized her memories were clouded, and she couldn't recall what had occurred. The more she tried to remember, the more she forgot. Just then, Riella timidly knocked on the door of Nia's room, afraid of disturbing her but eager to see her. The mistress asked for permission to enter, and Nia, relieved to have regained her appearance, allowed Riella inside. When Riella entered, concern was written on her face, despite Nia's assurance that she could handle things. Grabbing Nia's hand, Riella checked her temperature and pulse, only then believing that her assistant was truly back to normal. Riella explained that she had bought Nia a lot of fruits and flowers that were easy to digest and would help her feel better. Nia laughed cheerfully at the thought. When Nia was completely well, she and Riella went to her flower shop. There, the assistant quickly found herself in a playful battle for a glass of juice with Hound. The Archduke, however, declared that Nia had no right to drink or eat the same things as people of higher status. Riella, watching this exchange with concern, felt awkward. As they continued, a woman knocked on the shop window, asking for help. Riella immediately approached her friend and inquired about the situation. The woman explained that she wanted to decorate a table in her restaurant with flowers, but had limited funds. She requested something inexpensive yet beautiful. Riella, who ran her flower business surprisingly well, quickly formed a plan to fulfill the client's request. She carefully selected a few damaged and single flowers, knowing she could combine them into a stunning bouquet. She focused on flowers with slightly wilted petals or broken stems and, with her special scissors, cut the necessary pieces. Afterward, she combined 5 different types of flowers to create an affordable yet beautiful arrangement. When she handed the bouquet to the client, Riella explained that she had used slightly damaged flowers, which kept the price low. The woman was delighted and, before leaving, promised she would never buy from anyone else but Riella. Throughout this, the Archduke watched with slight dissatisfaction, particularly because Riella, with such an inheritance, was working in a flower shop. Nia noticed this and commented that Howd seemed to be eyeing Riella so intently that he might wear a hole in her with his gaze. The Archduke, embarrassed, turned away. He almost missed Lucien's entrance into the shop. Lucien, having gotten bored, decided to visit Riella. Concerned, he brought her a snack so she wouldn't go hungry while working. Riella was surprised by the gesture. Lucien pulled out sweets with flowers, a rare treat that she loved but could hardly find, as they were usually sold out quickly. Seeing this exchange, Hound's anger flared, unable to stand the close communication between Riella and the Round Table representative. Nia, teasing the Archduke, laughed and remarked that he looked as though he wanted to kill Lucien instead of treating him to food. They tried to avoid the Archduke's presence as Lucien stepped further into the store. Lucien greeted Nia and Hound warmly, but the Archduke responded with a cold greeting, still irked by Lucien's closeness to Riella, even though Lucien had no fault in it. Han called Lucien's position into question, suggesting that the representative of the Round Table must be busy. Lucien, however, replied that he had less to do than the Archduke in war, and that, of the two, it was Han who needed to leave the shop. Hearing this exchange, Riella was surprised to learn that the Archduke had also been offered the position of representative for the Round Table, but had refused it. After the argument settled, Lucien noticed the papers on the table and deduced that they were materials related to the Room of Stones. The Archduke, irritated, tried to dismiss the topic, but Lucien had already sat down and began to think aloud with the others about how to open the room. Reluctantly, the Archduke explained that he was able to guess which stones were in the room the last time the door had been opened. He was certain that his guesses were correct and that the Duchess had placed strong protections on the room, making it difficult to open. Shuddering at the thought of the old woman's troublesome nature, Han swallowed hard, knowing for sure that Hosang had designed these puzzles to make him suffer. He explained that the stone room consisted of 3 parts, meaning there would be 3 stages of defense. Lucien, puzzled, asked why they couldn't simply open the doors and take the stones, but Han explained that in order to obtain the strongest stones, they needed to open all the doors. There was no other way to take them. Meanwhile, even the very first and simplest door posed a difficult test, making a lot of noise as it was opened by Camilla, something Riella remembered all too well. Han continued explaining that in the first room there was the wind-free pilly, a very aggressive stone. Lucien, aware of its dangers, was concerned, but the Archduke reassured him, confidently stating that he could pacify the pilly. Lucien was partly convinced but still had doubts. Han then mentioned that other stones in the room would also pose challenges. Riella, who had been carefully taking notes, began to think back to the day when Camilla entered the room. The Archduke had been able to close the door before the other stones were triggered, but he had managed to glimpse a few. That was why Han was now so worried. He was sure that the obsidian of the abyss was inside, still dormant. Everyone, except Riella, who knew nothing of the stones, grew alarmed. The obsidian of the abyss was one of the strongest stones, and Lucien, though sceptical, agreed that all possibilities should be considered. Riella, noticing their concern, was confused. Lucien, seeing her puzzled expression, began to explain that the obsidian of the abyss was a stone that brought darkness, This stone was feared, as it could cover an entire city in darkness, and the radius of its effect was enormous. But interestingly, Lucien added, while everything around you may be completely black, if you looked up at the sky, you could still see stars. Nia confirmed Lucien's words, revealing that Duchess Hoson had once taught her to navigate by the stars so she could find her way in the dark. Riella was impressed by her assistant's skills, and the others, jealous of the praise, grumbled that they could do it too. Lucien continued to think aloud, realizing that inside the room of stones, no stars would be visible due to the ceiling. This made Riella uneasy, as it meant they wouldn't be able to navigate using the stars. Hound added to Riella's concerns, explaining that it was highly likely that the Duchess had placed the obsidian of the abyss alongside another powerful stone, the infinity spinel. Together, these stones would create a darkness so absolute that no one could find their way due to the infinite space created by the combination. Lucien expressed concern, stating that no matter how powerful a stonemancer was, they would be in danger if they entered the room. He scolded the Archduke for planning to go in alone, warning him that the stones were too unpredictable and ruthless. Nia, teasing Hound, pointed out that Duchess Hoson had conquered all of these stones on her own, which made Riella feel awkward. The Archduke, undeterred, was determined to open the room at all costs, and assured Lucien that he didn't need to come with him. The two men continued to argue when, suddenly, the door to the flower shop swung open and a young man rushed inside, calling for Riella. Alvin, as the boy was named, was immediately met with cold stares from Han, Hound, and Lucien, who considered him too noisy. Alvin, worried he had made a mistake by coming in, hesitated, but Riella, sensing his fear, quickly comforted him. Turning to the evil trio, she asked them to stop scaring her friend, as he had come with an important message. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted, and Han, Hound, and Lucien became noticeably warmer, allowing Alvin to speak freely. Alvin explained that he urgently needed the largest and most beautiful flowers, as time was running out. Riella, noticing his anxiety, asked if Charlotte had truly returned. Alvin confirmed that she would arrive in just a few minutes, but there were no flowers prepared. Riella felt sympathy for the couple, knowing they had never been able to confess their feelings during their past separation. She genuinely wanted to help Alvin. Alvin, desperate, offered to pay any amount if Riella could make a bouquet before Charlotte's arrival. Without hesitation, Riella set to work, gathering the most beautiful and largest flowers she could find. Her hands moved swiftly, expertly, alternating between tools to create the perfect bouquet. Alvin, watching nervously, saw a group of stonemancers returning from a battle against the dragon, and among them was Charlotte. He shouted the news to Riella, and she rushed to speed up her work. With mere seconds left, Riella had to decide which flowers would best suit Charlotte's appearance, considering her hair and eyes. Throughout the frantic preparations, the Archduke, observing the scene, realized that he had never considered flowers to be of much interest before, but now he found himself fascinated by their compositions. Han, though he knew Riella could use some assistance, was at a loss for what to do since he knew nothing about flowers and decided to remain out of the way.